Ladies and gentlemen, could you please welcome back to the stage your chair, Anita Arnand.
So you are the people I like to call the bitter enders. Well done. I wish we had badges for you, but we don't. You just have my thanks for being here. But also, it will be thanks enough, actually, when you hear the last session. Because these two, and I've just been chatting to them, are extraordinary people. First of all, let me just give you a little bit of a backdrop against which we hear them. You might have heard that there are rumours, and more than rumours, going around that the G7 is going to be presented with an international plan for a global task force of 10,000 medics and scientists to tackle any major disease outbreak in the world. So that is happening right now, and that is a direct result of what happened in West Africa and the Ebola outbreak. 27,000 people infected. It was voracious, it was fast, and it was ruthless. You know the way that this disease spreads, I'm sure. It takes a very special kind of person to go out and put themselves in harm's way like this, but we are going to hear from two such who not only know a lot about Ebola, but they know a lot about Sierra Leone. Please, I'd love you to welcome to the stage Brigadier Kevin Beaton, OBE, and Lieutenant Colonel Maggie Durang-Quarank, who are going to tell you about what it was like fighting in the front line against Ebola.
Sit down, Maggie. Can you sit down?
Is he your commanding officer? Did he just order you to sit down, Maggie? Fantastic. I love that.
I can't have her standing up there all the way through this. It's just about good afternoon. My name is Brigadier Kevin Beaton. A real privilege to be able to come and speak to you this afternoon. So thank you so much for inviting me and giving us an opportunity to talk. Well, it's not just about Ebola, actually, because the task I was given was to talk about how we look after people in conflict, which for us predominantly has been Afghanistan and Iraq over the last 10 to 15 years, and then how we made the transition into looking after people with Ebola. And you'll forgive me as well, because I'm fighting through a summer cold at the moment. In the days of the empire, when we controlled 25% of the surface of the earth, the military medical services was a huge organization with hospitals and people across the globe. And we've withered now to a tiny sort of vestigial remnant. But I believe that, and it's humbling for me to come to the NHS, I believe that the NHS draws much of its origins from military medicine. Because whilst in the United Kingdom we were still at the beginning of this century wrestling with private medicine and people having to rely on the length of their pockets for healthcare, the military overseas and in conflict would provide healthcare free at point of need, independent of race, creed, class, and even which side you were on, and we would base that care on clinical need alone. So those were the principles that we used for medicine on the battlefield. And I believe that 2 generations of soldiers, finding themselves being treated equally next to the aristocracy, came back to the United Kingdom after the First and Second World War and said, that's the type of health service that we want in our country, the type of health service that we've been used to in the military. So I think that the NHS takes a lot from how we did our business. And in those early days of the NHS, a lot of military systems for organisation were adopted. And now all of my clinicians that deploy overseas with the Army work in the NHS. And I think people often regard us as being, in military medicine, a separate entity. But they're with you through most of their working career, keeping their skills up to date. And whether they're regular or reservists, they then come away to work with us to do their stuff, and they go back to working with you. So I think that military medicine and the National Health Service have far more in common than people actually realise. And though our challenges are different, they are similar, because like you, I can't pay my people enough to do what they do. When you're working with medics who are sometimes vomiting with fear at the prospect of going into a dangerous situation, you have to rely on leadership and motivation and the quality of your people to make that work. And that's exactly the same story in the NHS. As you're combating ever-decreasing resources, being asked to do ever more, it's all about leadership and getting your people to go that extra yard. So we have the same challenge. And I don't belittle the challenge in the NHS compared to leading into battle either, because for us it's a one quick, normally it's over in a flash, but you're having people that are going through a complete career of grinding through the difficulties of everyday working in the NHS. So we have the same leadership challenges. Why do we choose to look after soldiers? And for me, I think it's absolutely important to have an understanding of the philosophy. And I can only speak for myself, but I've seen the consequences of looking after soldiers on the battlefield. It's bloody grisly, and it's unpleasant, and it's ghastly. And you think you understand military trauma when you're dealing with a patient overseas. There's the blood and the sweat and the snot and the fear. But you package them up, you send them to the hospital or you send them home, you repack your kit to get ready for the next casualty, and then a bit of the worry chip about that patient leaves with them. My job previous to this was working with Dame Julie Moore in Birmingham, where we were looking after the soldiers that were coming back wounded. And I think it was there that you really started to see the total consequences of the effect of military service on these people. You understood the consequences when you would see an SAS commander, highly decorated, coming into the ITU and breaking down into uncontrollable sobs as he sees the broken and disfigured body of one of his soldiers that's been wounded carrying out his orders. You understand the consequences when you're stood with a mum and a dad at the head of a bed of a soldier as it has to be explained to him that he's lost both his legs above the knee. You understand the consequences when you're with a mum with your arm round her in ITU after her son has lost a month's fight to stay with her and his life support machine has been switched off, and perhaps even worse, you understand the consequences when your nurses are still trying to support a mother whose son's so badly brain damaged that it'll never acknowledge her or smile at her again. And the consequences for her of keeping a desperate and lonely vigil by his bedside is losing a job and losing a marriage. And I don't think a week went past in Birmingham when I didn't say to myself, is it worth it? Why are we doing this? Why are we sending our bravest and our best overseas to come back in this awful state? And in my more philosophical moments, I had to conclude that it was worth it. I'm really clear that I want my children to be able to grow up in a society where they can come to their own conclusions, make their own analysis and assessment on life, and then voice those opinions freed from political or religious dogma. And sometimes if you want to preserve that, you have to be prepared to support people that are using force to fight for it. And I'm reinforced in that view when I reflect back on being in Iraq in 2003 and seeing Saddam's torture chambers. I'm reinforced in that view when I reflect back on being in Sierra Leone and seeing the medieval barbarity of the atrocities people were committing there. I'm reinforced in that view when I reflect on Malala, who it was our privilege to treat at Birmingham, being shot in the face for having the temerity to want to be educated. And I'm reinforced in that view when I see these awful videos coming out of ISIS and what they're doing to people there. So my conclusion is that it is worth it, and it's that philosophy that underpins what we do. But if we're going to send our soldiers into conflict, we have to give them absolutely the best possible medical care that we can, and my job at the moment is training and preparing people to do that. And we're really good, I believe, at deploying hospitals overseas, trying to get them ready to go out and treat. And the US have very kindly recently acknowledged that our survival statistics in Afghanistan have been even better than their own. So we've been able to deliver real excellence. We use the ADAIR system, Team Task Individual, and spend a lot of time thinking about how we bring our teams together. And the great advantage we have over yourselves is I can bring the whole team together away from their workplace and train and practice them together. It's an enormous advantage. I'm going to show you a bit of video. I apologize for the fact that you'll see more of me speaking in it, but it's a really nice clip which demonstrates how we do our macro simulation.
This is Camp Bastion Hospital, but it isn't Afghanistan, it's York. Here, the Army have set up a simulation of the entire military field hospital. These medics are the last hospital team who will be deployed to Afghanistan, where they'll face casualties for real. I'm Salia Hassan. I served in the British Army for 4 years. Now I'm an emergency medicine doctor in the NHS, and I've come to see what civilian medicine can learn from medical simulation at this level. It's a method called macro simulation, replicating exactly the conditions medics will face in the field. Today starts with a helicopter rescue.
I'm now in a replica of the helicopter they use out in Afghanistan. The team behind me are prepping to receive 3 casualties that are going to arrive all at the same time. This place is about to get incredibly busy.
The scenario is so realistic that the medics are engulfed in the roar of rotor blades and the heat of a helicopter engine.
It's really dark in here, and there's even the smell of aviation fuel. In Afghanistan, when they're flying, the lights have to be out, and that's exactly what they've done here. I can see little red torches for light.
After treating their patients in pitch darkness, the medics have to transfer them the moment the helicopter lands.
So what we've got now is the casualty who's been packaged up and has been stabilised on the helicopter is now being transferred into the hospital.
The casualties are rushed into one of the most advanced simulated hospitals ever built.
It's essentially a hospital with the roof taken off, and below us we've got 450 personnel. And this is the first time that they'll have all come together to work.
Every medic is being closely monitored. In charge of the whole operation is Dr. and Army Brigadier Kevin Beaton. He was my squadron commander in Bosnia and inspired me to study medicine. He spent the last 10 years driving innovations in medical training.
We use video and sound to record all of the activities at the various stages. That screen is showing a patient actually being treated inside the helicopter simulator. And we can switch between all of these different scenes and shots of what's going on to get a feel for how each department's performing.
Have a good look at them and make a quick decision if they...
I think the best analogy that we've found is we've moved from driving your car into the local quick fit to now something akin to the Ferrari pit stop at a Formula One event, where there's a whole team of people stood around the patient, ready immediately to start getting to grips with what they have to do.
Research into macro simulation shows that it improves teamwork, leadership, and organisation, which are known to affect clinical outcomes for patients. An important review by leading experts in medical education found that it makes a significant contribution to reducing clinical and institutional risk to patients. Another study called it a finishing school for experts.
Second only, I spoke earlier about supporting our forces in protecting our way of life. Second only to that from me is the privilege of looking after our soldiers. This essentially shows a slide that shows what the HOSPEX situation does. It's our hospital exercise. So we've been lucky enough in Afghanistan and Iraq to be able to get our hospitals together up to 12 months before they deploy, and then take them through directed training and collective training in the 12-month lead-up. And it's really useful for us because in that hospital simulator, we reproduce the stresses and the challenges of operating overseas, and very quickly we can pick up who's struggling, who needs extra coaching, mentoring, or even replacing. And we're quite ruthless about making sure that we determine suitability for task before we get out of the door and before we start delivering care. And over the last 10, 12 years of campaigning, this has been a regular system that we've used. The end result is, this is one of our guys, a triple amputee, and this is a picture of him 3 weeks after he was blown up. 3 weeks after he was blown up. So that intensive level of care in terms of looking after them with young, fit men who are motivated to get better has really been showing results. And these guys are a joy to look after. All of the pictures, by the way, are shown with their permission. But these guys are a joy to look after. And they just have an irrepressible spirit, even when they're facing the most severe of injuries. And I was never happier than when, at my previous job, I'd be phoned up by matron who would say, "Sir, you've got to come up to the ward because they're playing trains again. The one with the most powerful wheelchair is towing all the others behind. They're going as fast as they can, and they're trying to make the one at the end fall off." And on another occasion, we had a group of young officers, 5 of them, without 5 legs between them, who decided that they were going to mount an escape from the hospital and go on the pop downtown. And with Colditz-like precision, they ordered some disabled taxis. They managed to extricate themselves from the ward. They had drips and external fixators and pajamas and all sorts of paraphernalia with them. And they told the taxi drivers, "Take us to the most expensive restaurant in Birmingham." And when they arrived outside the restaurant wasn't going to let them in. They didn't know what they were or where they came from. And they just looked at these guys spilling out of these taxis and said, you can't come in here. They then realized that they were wounded soldiers, and so they brought them in and they gave them a table in the corner of the restaurant. And the guy said, "We are going to be in so much poo when we get back." And I had a really scary matron at the time, that we better lay one on here and make this worthwhile. And they did. And they hit the wines list, they hit the gin and tonics, they got right royally drunk. And then at the end of the meal, they said, "Right, we better call for the bill, go back to the hospital to face the music." And they called the bill over. And the waiter said, "It's all right, gentlemen, everybody else in this restaurant this evening has realized who you are. They've clubbed together and they've paid the bill for you." And that for me was a real tangible statement of how much the nation wants to support our people going overseas. And they are quite spectacular individuals to support. I'll share with you an anecdote, again, with his permission, about Corporal Baldwin, captain of the regimental football side, destined to be the regimental sergeant major, really going places in his army career, a real character in his regiment. And he came back to Afghanistan to us with both his legs blown off above the knee. He had a wife, 2 daughters, 5 and 7, pretty blonde-haired, blue-eyed girls. And when we wake them up in Birmingham, we wake them up very carefully, because often the last thing they remember is being in conflict, and they're still in combat mode. And they're often distressed, anxious, and most interestingly, they nearly always want to know where their mates are and if their mates are safe. So we wake them up in the light of day, and we normally have some family members present when we do that, so that they hear a voice from home when they wake up to help them understand that they're now back in UK. We had his mum and his wife with him, but decided to wake him up with his dad and his younger brother. And they came into ITU, sat by the bed, and we woke him up slowly and carefully, explained to him what had happened. He had understandably a grief reaction. but very quickly started to philosophize about what had happened and saying that he would go and get involved in some sport, and he had to think about ways of providing for his family now, and started to rationalize his situation amazingly quickly. And after about an hour, his father said to him, look, I'm really sorry, son, but I've got to take your younger brother away because I've got to take him to an appointment. And we're late. In fact, we're a day late because we thought they were going to wake you up yesterday, but they didn't, so they've woken you up today. So I'm going to take him away, and your mum and your wife will come in and see you later on. And Corporal Baldwin looked at his dad and said, what do you mean you're taking my younger brother, who was sat at the end of the bed like a rabbit in the headlights? You're taking my younger brother away to an appointment. And his dad said, you don't know, because you haven't been told, but I'm taking your brother to Catterick today because he's joining the army. And without hesitating, Corporal Baldwin looked at his younger brother and he said, you go away and be the best soldier you can be. You go away and join my regiment, and you go away and make our family proud. And they're just such a real joy to look after. And I often wonder that our nation doesn't deserve people as good as that. And here's a shot of another lad who said to me, sir, I don't care if I've lost my legs. At least because of the treatment that your medics have given me, I'm going to see my children grow up. So that's what we've been doing in Afghanistan. We've become, I think, world leaders at delivering trauma. And external assurance is as key to us as it is to you. And we too have had our CQC inspections and always pass them with flying colours. So then with that history of looking after trauma, we are in the middle last summer of the Ebola outbreak erupting. And suddenly the NGOs, who never normally want anything to do with the military, they want to keep us completely at arm's length. Suddenly, MSF, of all people, are saying this. Out of the depth of Africa, MSF are saying that we must deploy the military to come and help us. I was asked to go down to see our Chief of Joint Operations and our Minister, and they asked me to go out to Sierra Leone last August, and to come back and tell them two things. Firstly, whether we could set up an Ebola hospital, something we'd never done before, and secondly, much more importantly, should we? Much more difficult question to answer. Should we? I've got great staff at our training centre, and I was confident that they could show the agility, the flexibility, and the adaptability to turn this requirement to train an Ebola force round really quickly, despite all the challenges of procuring new equipment and testing it and sorting out SOPs. So I was really comfortable that at pace and then speed, we could do that. The big dilemma for me was, should we put our military medics at risk to go over to this African country, especially at a time when this virus was just knocking over healthcare workers. 350 healthcare workers to date have died. So a really dangerous situation to be in. And my first response, to be frank, was we want F all to do with that. It's not our business, it's not what we're good at. Why on earth do we want to go and get involved in it? However, after having been out to Sierra Leone, understanding the virus a bit better, looking at what other people were doing, my conclusion was that we should go, and for a host of reasons, that the president of Sierra Leone said, my country is dying, and they needed somebody to assist them. It was my privilege to be in Sierra Leone during their civil war for 14 months, so I had an affinity with that country, but they desperately needed help. Most importantly for me, though, is that, and this is really different to supporting combat operations, but there were some really good people from our nation that had gone over to Sierra Leone to help, and I was there to help bring Will Pooley back. And these weren't soldiers, but these were people that we should be equally proud of, because they were putting themselves at risk selflessly to go and deliver help overseas in just a way that our nation seems to do that. and they had nowhere to be treated appropriately if they caught Ebola. And I felt that we as a nation needed to use our military medical services in the absence of anybody else that could do it, and that was important, to demonstrate that we would do what it takes in order to look after our people overseas. And my view about going to Ebola, well, it was akin to a high-risk hostage rescue mission that the Special Forces conduct when one of our people is in trouble. So for that reason, and haunted with the thought that I may see some of my own doctors and nurses in coffins coming back from Sierra Leone, for that reason I decided that the military medical services should go over there and should deliver that response. And the dilemma for us was that our traditional way of doing stuff was no longer appropriate to Ebola virus. We had to completely invert our modus operandi. This awful virus feeds on the propensity of humans to put themselves at risk in order to care for each other. It suckles on the milk of human kindness. The kindness of a mother who can't bear to see her children suffering and wants to care for them. The kindness of a healthcare worker who, despite suboptimal equipment in Sierra Leone, would still step up to the plate and try and look after people. And I was worried that we would spread it further by coming from overseas and not doing the job properly and taking the virus home with us. So we had to be really brutal in inverting our normal patient-centric approach and now working to a mantra that the patient comes second to carer safety. Really strange place to be in. And we also worked on the line that there was no such thing as an emergency in an Ebola hospital. Because when you're suited up and you're in that viremic environment, it's like handling unstable live explosive, where the slightest slip or stutter or falter or failing of concentration can have catastrophic consequences. So if somebody's in trouble, you walk towards them slowly and methodically, maintaining your own safety. And it's only by doing that that you can ensure that the virus doesn't spread. And we used our systems that we'd already established to do this. And we're really clear with that quote from Aristotle, that excellence must become a habit, not an act. And actually, military drills and procedures lended itself really well to delivering this type of care. We were very clear that we weren't the experts in this area. And so when we were given the task to get an Ebola hospital ready within 4 weeks, we opened our doors to anybody that would come and advise, assist, and help us. And so those were the lists of people that we worked with to try and help us put this together. And this is the sort of stuff that we started to get on with. So we were starting to build our first Ebola hospital in Sierra Leone, but in our hangar in York, and you saw it earlier, we built a complete simulation of that Ebola hospital. And actually we had the simulation set up before the hospital was finished in Sierra Leone, and we started working people through it. But you can see the type of stuff that we were working through in order to get our people prepared. And then we're using really credible training cues. That's a mannequin, by the way, there. But taking people through every aspect of the patient journey, desensitizing them to being in the equipment and getting them to do their everyday routine healthcare tasks in this kit. And the top photo is one of our intensivists putting a central line in. And actually, he went through putting a central line in 4 times in PPE. He said, this is incredible. I'll do this every day in the NHS without any trouble at all. Suddenly now, doing it in a simulated way in the PPE, in the heat, is a completely different challenge. So it's really important that we pay forensic detail to try and recreate the circumstances. We produced our own donning and doffing tables to take people through. And then I can't talk about them all, but some innovative systems. So we found a a contaminant that would fluoresce under UV light. And we could mix this contaminant with our patients. We have simulated urine, feces, vomit, blood. And we could mix this contaminant with all of those bodily fluids. And so if you've got a bit of blood on you or a bit of feces, simulated feces, then it would fluoresce. And the particular contaminant we found was denatured by chlorine, which is what we used in Sierra Leone. So this is a picture of a patient being brought out of the toilet cubicle where there's been an episode of diarrhea and vomiting, and the staff are bringing them out. And then as they exited the training system, we would look at where their patterns of contamination would be, and then we could map every individual. And you can do this for herd and individual analysis. So you can see where your people are routinely getting their heavy contamination. One guy was getting a large amount of contamination across here, and it was purely because of the way he was using a mop. He was holding it close to him rather than holding it out. So you could really start to very quickly have a learning system of changing behaviors. We started to create the data. We've got over 1,600 people now that have been through this. And then once they've come out, we can fluoresce them again to reassure them that the stuff had gone. Really useful for us determining practice and procedures, but also for reassuring the staff that we're going through. Other people trained with us, and we bought them time. So other organizations that wanted to go out weren't able to prepare their own training as quickly as us, so they came and trained with us. That's basically our campaign plan to try and tackle Ebola. It was really about identifying when we got there where the bodies were, firstly, identifying a way to pick them up safely, getting people to phone up to tell us that they had an Ebola case in their house. Initially, we couldn't put them in a hospital. There weren't enough beds. So we'd try and send them food and keep them quarantined, getting safe transport to bring them through, burying them safely. We built 800 beds to put the patients in to isolate them. And throughout all of this, a campaign of behavioral change to educate them to understand about what the virus was going on, as well as using the command and control in the national Ebola centers and the district Ebola centers. And the military could really, really help with that. And it was scary times. You know, when we were going up to 1,000 patients a week before Christmas, and it just wasn't slowing down, and we were doing everything we could as fast as we could. And the WHO was saying it's going to break out of control and you're going to have 20,000 cases, and CDC was saying you're going to lose Freetown. It was a nervous time, and you just had to keep plugging away. And eventually the curve bent and started to come down. That's one of the facilities that we built. We built another 6 of those. And then CQC didn't want to come out to check our Ebola hospital. That was really strange. But we did get the World Health Organization to come out and have a look at us. And so our external assurance is here. And one of my favorite stories about Ebola is about Mohammed Kamara, who was a nursing student with 3 friends, 3 months into their nursing course, all sleeping on the same mattress in the same room. It's third world out there, but starting their nursing courses. And 3 months into the course, all of the colleges are closed down because of Ebola, so all the schools and colleges are closed down. All of the hospitals have effectively stopped functioning because the healthcare workers are afraid of being infected by feverish people coming in. Mohammed's year, we got together and said, right, you know, you're going to stop coming to college, but we want volunteers to train to work in our Ebola facility at the Connaught Hospital in town. Lots of people volunteered, and then the next day, just Mohammed and his 2 colleagues turned up. Some of the other volunteers never seen again and never came back to the course. 2 months into working at Connaught, 2 of Mohammed's friends had caught Ebola and came into our facility at Kerrytown and were looked after, and he came to visit them. And they got through pretty quickly and were survivors. And a month later, Mohammed himself caught Ebola and was insistent that he was going to come to our facility. And he came with the expectation of recovering as his friends did. but he was our longest staying patient. He was with us for 26 days, seriously ill throughout. And at one stage, he thought that he was definitely going to die. And he recounted afterwards, when I was in my blackness and despair and I couldn't even open my eyes, I was so grateful for the care that came, not clinical care because I didn't notice that, but people holding my hand, putting a hand on my shoulder, talking to me and reassuring me and encouraging me to get better. And as he slowly started to improve, he said to one of the nurses that had been looking after him, I feel I know you really well, I know your voice really well, but I've never seen your face. Please, can I see your face? And she said, look, we can't do that. You know, we're in this protective equipment. There's no way I can show you my face. But she said, I'll tell you what I'll do. You get yourself well, get up out of this bed, go to the visitors area by the chain link fence. And when you do that, I will come to the other side of that fence in my scrubs. And I will do the Ebola survivors dance for you that we're going to do together when you get better. And he did do that. And this nurse came and danced for him when he was well enough to come through. Thank you. I've put that up for questions, but we've decided that we'll have questions later. And it's my children, actually, that take the mickey out of me endlessly and are insistent that this guy looks like me. I can't see it somehow, but I just don't see the likeness. We'll have questions after Maggie's spoken. And we've been inundated with requests from the NHS about how to convey what we've done in Ebola. You've got some flyers. At my training centre in York, we're very happy to host people if they want to come and visit us. We had NHS Scotland come down. But if you want to send any of your people down to see how we've done stuff and tell us how we could have done it better, then I'd be delighted to host you. Those are the dates and the flyers are out there. And now I'm going to hand over to Maggie. Thank you very much for your attention.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. As you can see from the slide, my name is Lieutenant Colonel Maggie Durant. I'm a reservist. My day job is in the NHS. I work at a place called the Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt Orthopaedic Specialist Hospital just outside of Oswestry on the Shropshire North Wales borders. I've been a reservist for too many years, 30 years now, so there's an awful lot that keeps me there and keeps me going. As a reservist, my current role is with 208 Liverpool Field Hospital, and I was very privileged to have the opportunity to be selected as the senior nursing officer for the Ebola treatment facility, which the commander has just been talking to you about, that was set up by the military. I went out in December, having been through the training that has been described, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that meant, but also a little bit about how that equates back to my NHS role and what it means as a reservist, and for you potentially having reservists as your employees, what that might mean to you and what they can bring back. I didn't have a great deal of notice. I say previously, I've done Iraq and I've done Afghanistan, and we had plenty of time in those because we knew when we were going to be deploying. This came as a telephone call. Are you interested? Yeah, definitely. This was in the press. Am I available? I'd like to think so. And how soon can you deploy? Well, took all that information away, and from my employer's perspective, they probably had, they certainly had just about over 3 weeks, not quite 4 weeks, warning. At the time, I was actually in America with my reserve unit on our annual deployment exercise, training on the trauma front, setting up a field hospital. So by the time I actually got back into work and had a meeting with my boss, I actually had 2 weeks before my mobilisation date. So I couldn't have done the job that I was privileged to do without the support of my NHS employer, which was absolutely vital. But we worked together to say, how can we cover my role? my role within the organisation is a service improvement facilitator. So I do a lot of project work and a lot to do with that wonderful thing called the RTT, referral to treatment target. So, and we got a lot of pressures within orthopaedics. So it wasn't good timing for them, but they were very, very accommodating, for which I'm very grateful. Also my family. The pre-deployment training phase that we went through at the AMSTC, the Army Medical Services Training Centre up in York, helped reduce the anxieties, because although we were all enthusiastic, as we were, because we'd said, yeah, I'd love to go, we still had our anxieties. So it helped those anxieties, it developed our knowledge. I'm a general nurse. I've got a background in intensive care, but I'm a general nurse these days. So I'm not an infectious disease specialist. I knew very little about Ebola until I went through that training process. But I came out with my knowledge level highly developed, knowing my skills for my personal protective equipment, skilled and drilled, really honed. But the training, because of the macro training, the collective training approach, meant that I also had that opportunity to see the shift teams work together, the cohesiveness build. We had Canadians deploying with us, so building that integration piece, absolutely fantastic people to work with. All of our levels of confidence were growing. We also developed our physical robustness, practicing in that PPE, and becoming more psychologically prepared and ready. That was the team that were on tranche 2. The approach from the medical services is that we need to change our clinical personnel on a cyclical basis, because you don't want people getting complacent. So you need to make sure that you change them over. So the first tranche had already been out as part of the command team with 22 Field Hospital. The main command team stayed in place, but the clinical personnel changed. I had 76 nurses and medics that I had responsibility for. And of course, from my personal feeling, and very much like the Brigadier, was I wanted to make sure that all my nurses and medics came home safely. The last thing I wanted was any one of those to come back in the wrong way. So that was always at the forefront of my mind when we were going through the training, but certainly when we were actually out there delivering the work. When we actually got out there, before we were allowed into the facility, and of course everybody's really eager, we're desperate to get going, we're there, we've done lots of training already. Sorry guys, take a step back, you've got to get used to the heat and the temperatures. So we had an acclimatization phase where we did even more training. So although we were used to using that PPE, and we've been in the training, this time we did it in the heat of the sun, on a tennis court in one of the accommodation areas, and we did lots of practicing again. Absolutely critical, absolutely vital. It brought home the need to make sure that we were well hydrated, that we were feeling good and positive in ourselves. So we honed that training yet again, so more refresher training. Then we went through that phase of saying, yeah, are we really ready? And we did some short sessions inside the treatment facility. What you're seeing in the picture there is a whiteboard, and I'll talk a little bit more about this as we do other bits, but that whiteboard, slightly light-hearted message that we used in training new people as they were coming in, are you ready to boil in the bag? Because believe me, when you're in that PPE suit, lightweight as it is, you do feel like you're boiling and you're sweating and getting used to that feeling. But we use these communication boards because when you've got this gear on, it's really challenging to talk over a radio. When you're inside the red zone, we were using radios to communicate out to our team members outside. Very challenging. So the whiteboards became an additional tool, very simple, but very, very effective. Come to the fence. So sometimes, with all the wonderful technology, and we've seen an awful lot here in the exhibitors hall over the last few days, sometimes actually the simple things were even more effective. So we use those simple tools. The realities of actually what it was like working there, the force protection, I should really say medical force protection, malaria was actually still one of the most significant risks, as well as the Ebola, to our personnel, because when they were in the treatment facility, they were in all their full PPE, making sure that they remembered to taking all their malaria protection, keeping their arms and their legs covered so that they didn't actually put themselves at risk, was again absolutely vital and very important. And they'd forget, because these are keen people, and they want to go running and they want to do sports. So we had to make sure that they did remember the importance of their the force protection elements of it as well. Brigadier's already spoken about self first, and that really was a cultural change for the clinicians. Very, very hard to put yourself ahead of your patients when you always put your patients first. The patient and staff visibility, again, the commander's already mentioned the fact that when you've got that mask on and that visor in front of you, the realities of being able to develop a relationship with your patients becomes much more challenging. The importance of touch. As nurses, I like to think that we do those things very well. We don't necessarily, as well as we could do, utilise some of those other techniques in our day-to-day practice. We really had to focus in on that communication side because they couldn't see our visual face, they couldn't see the expressions, so we had to reinforce that as best we could. So there was always a lot of gestures, a lot of touch, albeit we had gloves hands on, but making sure that we did that. For me in a managerial role, the governance side, absolutely critical. So if there was an incident, these PPE suits are very light. We've had one on display in the village, workforce village, over the last few days. They're very light. The actual treatment facilities were built of wood, which was rough, very rough. It wasn't nicely planed. You could snag your suit very, very easily. They tore. As soon as they had a breach of that PPE come out of the facility, I'm sorry guys, can you write a significant event report? Datex equivalent for those guys of you who use Datex back in the NHS. We all hate doing Datex incidents. They were, you must do them because we've got to learn from it. We've got to then change what we do. So it was a continual learning process. There's a number of other things there. Keeping staff morale when actually the patients that you're dealing with, if you get a number who die on a concessionary one after another, is again, it's very challenging, but keeping the staff morale high, giving them things to do in their downtime was all part of the staff management aspects. So we did have some tribulations. The air conditioning, yeah, it didn't always work. That was one of the problems, particularly for our patients. Again, the Brigadier mentioned the fact that the doctors were putting CVC lines in, and a technique that they're very used to doing, and likewise the nurses and medics taking blood, doing venipuncture. Needle stick injuries in the NHS are not uncommon. We only had 2 on my tour. That was 2 too many, but we still only had 2. We investigated them very, very thoroughly. And of course, we then had to manage the staff through those processes because their anxiety levels get high. So there was a huge element of focus very much on the staff as well as on the incident itself. But it's don't panic. There was no panic. People took it very much in their stride, but knowing that the risk of those procedures can only be mitigated by their skill, their attention to detail, and using those drills that have been honed in. We had a few issues with traveller's diarrhea with our personnel. I'm not going to go into that one because that's just, yeah. But we had staff shortages as a result of it because I had a lot of people go down. I have to say, unfortunately, including myself for a short while. So we had to manage those staffing levels as well. I've already mentioned the wood and the sun. People are desperately tempted to go and sunbathe. No, please. You've got to look after yourselves. So we had those tribulations, but we had even more triumphs. That quality and compassionate care I witnessed on a daily basis because the people I had out there were very motivated. They were there predominantly because they wanted to be there and wanted to do the job. And that's a real, very grateful from my point of view because they were easy to look to manage. We had some unexpected survivors, and again, the Ebola dance, I'd love to be able to sort of put a recording of it up there, because we all got involved in doing the Ebola dance. It's absolutely fabulous, and I'm no singer, so I won't do it without the song. We made a real big song and dance about our recovering patients. We also improved our care whilst we were there, nutritionally. Our longest patient, and again, I was very privileged to be one of the nurses looking after him. And yes, I also sat and held his hand and was there on the day that he got discharged, but back into rehabilitation. Nutritionally managing them and these patients was extremely challenging. We were trying to find things to tempt him. So developing our clinical guidelines for operations included putting together a nutritional care bundle. We had some experts there, but on the other end of the spectrum, the end of life care bundle getting produced, honed and developed, because as a team, accepting when you can no longer keep pushing and pushing and pushing, it's important to then make sure that you're giving them appropriate pain relief, that you're doing and you're keeping them comfortable, and that everybody is at that same target, and that you're doing the palliative care that they need and they deserve. I've already mentioned some of the aspects around, we had needle sticks, but so only the two, but we changed our processes in order to manage that and to deal with it. So we were doing some sharps management and changing the way we recorded things. We had a bit of a service improvement project while we were out there. Originally the care records were held inside the red zone, but we were finding that the paperwork was just deteriorating because of the impact of chlorine, the humidity. So we did a nice little project, involved all the clinicians. They were desperately keen so that we could actually bring that record and do it outside in the what we call the green zone, in the clean area. So nothing stood still. It was always learning. So we're constantly learning, constantly training, constantly evolving and developing.
Nothing stands still, I'm afraid.
No, that's fine. That's my last slide anyway. So the takeaways, this is all we bring back. And I feel very privileged to be able to take that one and to be able to deliver on it. Certainly as a leader, I feel it's helped me and enhanced my abilities, and I hope that I'll be bringing that back into my NHS daily practice on a much more frequent basis. I'm going to whiz through that one because I think the Commander, whilst we can take questions...
Well, actually, what we're going to do, and I was explaining to Kevin as well, the Brigadier, is that I know that there is an NHS Confederation Carabouche which has been booked, and a lot of you are on there, so I don't want a lot of people to be leaving during your excellent talk. So if you don't mind taking questions in a more informal setting, I know there are lots of people who are not on that train and will be loving to come and talk to you afterwards. If we can do it that way, I would be very grateful. I just wanted to say that it was an extraordinary way to end an extraordinary conference. I'm struck by not just your bravery and your ingenuity, but just how much you care. And there were a couple of times, particularly Kevin, when you were talking, where I had to hold back a little bit because it's very, very moving. This is kind of it for me. This is my last duty as chair of this conference. It's been an absolute pleasure being with you. It's been an absolute high to be ending with this, but I would like to welcome to the stage, I've got one more job, one more very important job,